if you ever want to have the hope of scaling into something, you can't just be guessing. You need to know what your customer wants, needs. You need to know them better than they know themselves. And it's hard to do that if the only way you're interfacing with people is, through Zendesk support tickets or something like that.
Get ready to build, protect, and sell your expertise online with the Online Genius Podcast. You'll laugh. We hope you won't cry. But you'll always be informed and prepared so you can have the success you want. Here's your host, Bobby Klink.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to this week's episode of the Online Genius Podcast. I'm your host, Bobby Klink, and I'm really excited for today's show because we're going to be talking about how to make money as an entrepreneur. And let's be honest, although we all love what we do and love serving people, we're in this to make money. And today we're going to be talking about the importance of creating multiple streams of income as an entrepreneur and understanding how you can do that to truly diversify your portfolio and give yourself the best chance to be successful for the long term. And luckily, you're not going to be listening to a lawyer tell you that or give you advice on that. Instead, you're going to be hearing from a truly wonderful guest expert today, Dorie Clark. Now, Dorie is an adjunct professor at Duke University's Fuqua School of Business and a professional speaker. She's the author of Entrepreneurial You, which came out from Harvard Business Review Press and was named one of the top 10 business books of 2017 by Forbes. And as an aside, I've read it twice. I read it about when it came out, and then I read it as part of my quest to read 52 business books this year. So you definitely should pick up a copy yourself. But her previous books include Reinventing You and Stand Out, which Inc. magazine declared the #1 leadership book of 2015 and was a Washington Post bestseller. The New York Times has described her as an expert at self-reinvention and helping others make changes in their lives. A former presidential campaign spokeswoman, she is a frequent contributor to the Harvard Business Review and is a consultant and speaker for clients such as Google, Yale University, and the World Bank. She's also producer of multiple Grammy-winning jazz albums. You can download her free Entrepreneurial You self-assessment workbook and learn more at dorieclark.com/entrepreneur. Welcome to the show, Dorie.
Hey, Bobby. Thanks. Great to speak with you.
Now, Dorie, I'm excited to talk with you about monetizing and how entrepreneurs can do that. But I always like to ask, a question or two that are outside of business. And with you, the thing that sticks out at me is the fact that you were the producer of a multiple Grammy award-winning jazz album. Why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So that was a very cool experience. The album was by the Ted Nash Big Band and came out last year. It's called Presidential Suites. And I actually like to think of it as my Grammy for networking because it's certainly not a Grammy for jazz acuity. It was the result of a friendship with a guy named Kabir Siegel, who I got to know, who's a fellow business author who's actually very involved in the jazz world. And essentially, we talk about the importance of networking. We all know that's an important thing in general in the business world. But just by way of example, for me, this is really kind of the meaning of networking. I mean, yes, it can get you clients, it can get you opportunities, but sometimes the opportunities are just things you really literally couldn't imagine, like getting to go to the Grammys, getting to win a Grammy, getting to be on stage at the Grammys. And in my case, I did a favor for Kabir. I introduced him to another person that I happen to know in the jazz world with whom he became a collaborator. And so essentially as a thank you, he brought me on this project, which ended up becoming a Grammy-winning project.
Well, and what does being a producer mean on a jazz album?
So a producer can mean a lot of things. Sometimes it means that you are musically in charge, that you have some degree of oversight. That was Kabir's role. That was not my role. But there are multiple sort of subsidiary producers. And so it sometimes can mean that you contributed money to a project, and it sometimes can mean that you contributed talent to a project. And so in my case, I did some advising about marketing and outreach strategy around the album.
Well, that's fantastic. I've got to figure out a way to do that. If there's a way for me to become a producer on albums by being a lawyer, I've got to figure that one out.
There probably is, I'm sure.
Well, theoretically, I guess I should get producer credit. I've helped my brother. He has a band down in Austin, which I help quite a bit. But, I actually at this point do want to turn to why we're really here today. And that's to talk about monetizing your expertise. And in reading Entrepreneurial You, there was a quote that really stood out to me. And it's pretty early on. You said, it turns out that what makes monetization sustainable is creating a solid foundation over time through a 3-step process: building your brand, monetizing your expertise, and extending your reach and impact online. Now, do you think of that as kind of a 3-step process, or are all of those steps happening simultaneously for an entrepreneur?
I think they're not necessarily happening simultaneously, but there are some overlaps. So for instance, building trust with your audience certainly needs to come first. That would be the first step. And that could happen through content creation, through building relationships so that people actually see, oh, this is a person who's knowledgeable. This is a person whose opinion and work I trust. They're not just in it to make a quick buck, but they're someone I want to listen to. So that starts it out. Of course, that continues throughout, because theoretically you need to continue with that relationship building and trust building throughout your professional life. I believe that, a next good step for people to take is monetizing your expertise in the sense of going deep with people. So meaning, a lot of times the discourse is around immediately transitioning to, oh, let's make some money online, let's do X, Y, or Z. But oftentimes, if you are especially doing info products or things like that, it's kind of irresponsible to immediately go to that, because you really need to understand your customers in a deep way. And sometimes that happens through coaching or consulting in person, so you can really get to know and understand their needs. It could be done perhaps with focus groups or really in-depth ethnographic or anthropological almost kind of research. But you really have to get in the heads of your audience so that you know that you are offering them something that is actually helpful and actually valuable. And that is not scalable, honestly. Those early days, that researching, that coming to understand their reality is something that's very hands-on and labor intensive. But it's only later that you can really effectively scale. And I think people fall down at various places along the journey. But in general, that is how I would map that out.
Well, so let me talk for a second, and I don't want to spend a bunch of time talking about the building your brand, but because I think that's, you have a couple of chapters in Entrepreneurial You about it, but that's really kind of not the focus. But I assume that, you would suggest to people that the most important thing is that they just be consistent and find 1 or 2 things that they can consistently do to build up content, to build trust with people, and to build their authority.
Yeah, absolutely. Consistency certainly matters a lot. I profiled a guy in Entrepreneurial You named James Clear, who built up a massive email list. At the time that I interviewed him, I think it was about 400,000. And the way that he did it, very simply, was blogging twice per week, every Monday and Thursday, over a period of several years. And he just, like a machine, kept churning it out. And through that regularity and the regular content production, he was able to strike up syndication deals with a number of large publishers, whether it's, Lifehacker or Business Insider, Inc., et cetera, et cetera. And he was able to spread his message and get a ton of email opt-ins as a result. So consistently creating high quality content pays huge dividends.
Well, I think another thing, a problem that a lot of entrepreneurs have, and I admit I have it, is the squirrel problem, right? It's there's a shiny object here, there's a shiny object there. How should entrepreneurs think about coming up with a plan for business building or brand building so that they're not constantly chasing 18 different things? And how do they figure out which one is best for them, whether it's blogging or creating video content or podcast content or any of the other ways you can go about building up a brand?
Well, in terms of deciding what is best for you, I think early on, the questions to ask are, number one, what does your audience consume? Where can you reach them most effectively? In some cases, it's very clear. If you're reaching a teen audience, maybe you want to be on Instagram or something like that. You don't necessarily want to be on Facebook because that's not cool if you're a teenager, etc. So there's some degree of where is your audience. There's also natural proclivities. Some people love video. Some people hate it, and but they say, oh, I'd like to write. So thinking, is it audio? Is it video? Is it the written word? Those can help you make your decisions. But ultimately, I think if you are agnostic about those questions, or you just are interested in a lot of things, a methodology that I use, and I've written about this in the Harvard Business Review, and I have a short online masterclass that I do called Be More Productive, and I share this methodology. But the basic idea of how I do goal setting personally is that every 6 months, instead of having annual goals, I do 6-month goals. And for this 6-month period, I have no more than 2 professional goals at a time. Now, obviously, in between, then you're doing other stuff. I mean, you're answering emails because you have to in order to keep your business going. But that's not a goal. When I say goal, I mean something that is a focus, an initiative that you are training your energy on. So above and beyond the maintenance level things that are necessary, this is where your energy is going. And you have no more than 2 at any given time. Now, let's say you decide, I'm going to do podcasting. I'll do podcasting and, pick whatever your thing is. Maybe it's something structural. Maybe it's like, I have to redo my website. Those would be good things to focus on as your 2 focal points for a 6-month period. Now, at the end of the 6 months, that's the place where you can evaluate. And you can say, do I like podcasting? Is this fun? Does this seem like it's getting me anywhere? If yes, then I will re-up and make podcasting once again one of my chief focal points. If I don't like it, well, it was an experiment. I tried it. I'm going to shift to something else.
Well, that's interesting. I thought what you were going to say is that after 6 months, you end up basically having developed a habit, so you don't have to focus on it as much. But I like the idea of not thinking in yearly goals, because I'm with you. If I try to think in a yearly goal, it's too amorphous, and I try to do too many things. So, I've heard other people talk about 3-month goals, but I like the approach of a 6-month goal. I think that's a good middle ground.
Yeah, it's been effective for me, for sure. That idea was actually borrowed from a Columbia strategy professor named Rita McGrath, who wrote a book called The End of Competitive Advantage, which is about strategy at the enterprise level. But in reading it, I thought, this actually really applies at the individual level as well. And her research showed that companies that did annual planning, it's just too slow, leaves you flat-footed. And so she suggests quarterly or, maybe every 6 months, having the goals at that increment instead.
Well, it's wonderful how you take these ideas from the corporate world and bring them to individual. I think that's fantastic. But at this point, I do want to switch to the monetization piece itself. And you are a big proponent. And I think one of the big push you make in Entrepreneurial You is to stress the notion of having a diversified mix of ways that you're making money. Why are you such a big proponent of that for entrepreneurs?
Well, a lot of people in the public discourse about entrepreneurship, they assume that entrepreneurship is all about risk. You have to be a risk taker to be an entrepreneur. And I disagree with that mightily. I think that the smartest entrepreneurs, even people that folks might think of as consummate risk takers like a Richard Branson, are constantly looking for ways to cap the downside, looking for ways to protect against uncertainty. The perfect example is when Richard Branson, of course, started Virgin Airways. He didn't buy the plane; he leased the plane. He said to Boeing, hey, if this whole airline doesn't work out, can I give the plane back? And he worked out a deal so that he could, so that he was not going to go bankrupt if the airline didn't work. He had an exit plan. And so similarly, I think the more that we can hedge our risk while simultaneously giving us unlimited opportunity and potential upside, that's a very valuable place to be. And so, I think most entrepreneurs recognize that it is inherently unsafe contrary to public opinion, to have one income stream, meaning your day job, right? A day job, it might seem secure, but then if it goes away, it goes away entirely. As entrepreneurs, most of us have more diversification in that we have more clients. And yet, we often are doing the exact same thing for those clients, which is not really diversification. What I would like to encourage people to think about instead is how can you take that same skill set, that same audience, that same IP that you've developed and leverage it in multiple different ways so that you can harness new value that otherwise would have been untapped.
Yeah, and I like that. I think if I counted it right, you and entrepreneurial you kind of categorize things. Often there's multiple things together, but you kind of walk through 8 different kinds of monetization, starting with the very one-on-one deep level coaching. And then you have speaking, podcasting, blogging, bringing followers together, creating courses, creating digital products and communities, and then working with others in either an affiliate or a joint venture. Now, I assume you don't suggest that entrepreneurs should run out and try to do all 8.
Indeed, that would be a poor idea. So to be clear, it's great to add multiple income streams over time, but I would not do them all at once.
Yeah, and if it'll make listeners feel better, I've been in business for myself for 5 years now, and I currently am doing 4 of the 8 things, but one of them isn't even monetized yet. That's this podcast. So I'm only doing 4, really 3 that I'm making money off of after 5 years in business. So don't feel a need to rush. But Dorie, earlier I think you started and hinted at that you think the first thing that people really ought to do is to take a deep dive, and often that is coaching and consulting.
Yes.
That seems so, 1990s. Why should entrepreneurs adopt a coaching practice first rather than jumping to the scalable things?
Yeah, well, there's a couple of reasons. The first one, of course, is that it doesn't cost any money to start, which is a pretty good incentive if you are a nascent entrepreneur. If you can start something that has no capital expenditures and you can dive into it, that's not a bad place to begin. But number 2, it allows you to really understand the customer in an intimate way. If you ever want to have the hope of scaling into something, you can't just be guessing. You need to know what your customer wants, needs. You need to know them better than they know themselves. And it's hard to do that if the only way you're interfacing with people is, through Zendesk support tickets or something like that. If you spend some time, even if it's not your ultimate goal, even if you spend some time as you get started really doing hands-on coaching or consulting for your clients, it gives you a perspective that in a lasting way will change your impression of how you relate to your customers and how you understand what they actually do need.
Well, so let me ask you this. Is there a period of time in your mind, say, is it 6 months, is it a year, or some length of time that people really should be coaching and consulting before they start to try to scale?
I don't have a hard and fast rule about that. I think that I wouldn't do it for a week and say, "Oh, I understand how this works." But ultimately, if you've spent some time immersing yourself in that world, there may be opportunities to begin to, again, if you are having these goals of creating things, you may see opportunities. But I think that one of the best things about doing the deep dive is that it teaches you new opportunities that you wouldn't have necessarily thought of before. So let's say that you want to create an online course. Maybe that's been your goal all along. Well, what should your online course be? You could guess, and I mean, if you're already coming from a certain world, then great. You have that advantage. You perhaps already know it. But if you're dealing with a population that you just haven't worked with as closely, sometimes the guess that you have is not going to be correct. And so taking the time to do the coaching or consulting will teach you more about their needs and what they actually want. Partly because they might ask you, partly because you might just see, oh, wow, there's a gap here. I mean, I think about things that I've created. I have a course. It's a $200 masterclass that I offer, which is an online course, and it's called the Rapid Content Creation Masterclass. Now, specifically, this is about, kind of a narrow niche, right? It's about how do you create high quality blogs quickly. And the reason that I created it, I wouldn't have guessed that was something that people really wanted. But in working with coaching clients, I kept hearing again and again, oh, it takes me, I know I should blog, but it takes me so long. It takes me, 6 hours to write this. Or, oh, I just keep procrastinating because it seems so stressful. It takes me weeks to come up with a draft because I just keep putting it off. It was a big issue for people. And folks were asking like, oh my God, you produce so much content. How do you do it? What is your secret? And when you hear the same question enough times, you begin to realize, oh, that's a clue. That people are giving you a clue as to what would be a good product. And so I created that as a result of that. So you sometimes get organic discoveries that you wouldn't otherwise.
I think that's great advice. I think one of the things that some people struggle with, and I have struggled with this myself, is there's often a mismatch between what I as a professional know that a client or a potential customer needs and what they want. Does the one-on-one coaching help you kind of bridge that gap?
Yeah, I think that's right. And also it helps you practice the language so that as you're learning how to explain to people what it is you offer and what they might actually need, you can see what works, right? Because ethically, it's not right to sell people something that they quote unquote want, but that would be a bad fit for them. And so if you're in a situation where they're asking for X and it would just be a bad idea, you could offer it, but it's not what they need. It's kind of going to blow up in their face and they're going to be angry at you in the end anyway. Then you can't give them that. All you can do is say, I understand that seems like it would be a good solution. In my opinion, having worked with, X number of people who are in this situation, what I've come to discover is that Y is actually something that I personally think would be better for you. Here's why. And you explain that in detail and you lay that out. And they either get it or they don't. Some people are not going to get it. Some people are going to say, nope, I want this other thing. And great, you send them on their merry way. It's not painful to lose a sale if you know that the sale would have gone bad ultimately. But sometimes you're able to show them, to convince them, not in the sense of persuading them into something they don't want, but in to persuade them to see, oh, right, this actually is a better option. This actually is the thing that I need. And if you can practice learning how to do that, that can become very valuable. It becomes practice for your copywriting.
Yeah, it's funny that you mentioned copywriting. I was going to say the exact same thing. You learn that and then it would help you to explain it in writing for other folks. I think that's great advice. After coaching, and again, I don't think you meant for Entrepreneurial You, the order to necessarily be kind of here's the order, but I like that you kind of then have a series of monetization methods where you talk about that in many ways are kind of building your business and probably not scalable for most people. And that's speaking and podcasting and blogging, because at the end of the day, those can be kind of labor intensive. What is the value of those and how do you actually make a lot of money doing any of those things?
Yeah. So podcasting, blogging, doing video blogs, etc. These are things that in the early days, it's important to recognize. In the early days, they're probably not going to make you any money at all. And of course, in your case, Bobby, as you mentioned, you haven't monetized your podcast yet. However, they're still very much worth doing. And here is why. Number one, in the long term, if you build up a sufficient following, which I know you will, you are able to monetize it. And so there's kind of the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. But number two, it's not that it has no value, and then all of a sudden later it has value. You're gaining value in other ways during that period pre-monetization, because what you're doing is you're building a following. And if you leverage it properly, if you get those people not just listening to your podcast, but hopefully on your email list, if you are, really using it to build a community, that becomes extremely powerful because those are folks that if they like what you're doing, you can turn them into purchasers of a variety of other things that you do, whether it is coaching, whether it is speaking, whether it's an online community, whether it's an online course, whether it's being on your email list and signing up for affiliate promotions you're doing. There's a lot of possibilities, and the podcast or the blog or what have you becomes the engine that drives it.
Well, and also in addition to that, you're also, I think, building a bank of assets because you are going to have all of these. In your case, for example, I'm guessing that when you turned to actually write your books, you had a lot of content already written from the blog posts you'd written. I mean, you obviously you couldn't just regurgitate it, but you had a lot of the bones there to start with.
Yes, absolutely. It's very helpful from that perspective.
Okay, so then after those, one of the things you talk about is bringing your followers together. And this, you're talking about actually having in-person live get-togethers of some sort or another. And I think a lot of people would just be scared away that there's too much involved in that, in the logistics. Does it have to be that complicated of a procedure to get your followers together?
Well, it doesn't necessarily. However, that being said, I think there's different scales of live events, right? So for instance, I have done a number of non-monetized live events. Let's say I have a meetup in cities that I'm traveling to. So I have this flagship online course, my Recognized Expert course. And here in New York, where I live, I've had numerous meetups where I invite people just, to a comedy show that I'm doing or to a bar or something like that. And we'll get together. If I'm traveling to Boston, if I'm traveling to Los Angeles, I've done that. And it's a nice way to bring people together. I'm not making money off of that directly, but I am building goodwill among the community, which makes it far more likely that people will want to stay involved in the community and perhaps sign up for other things. So that's a pretty easy and low-key way of doing it. If, however, you want to create something that's like a conference, big gathering that people pay money for, honestly, the logistics of that are hard. And that is why I put live events toward the end of the book, because I think that is something that you really should not consider until you are further down the path. If you have 50 people on your email list and you say, I'm going to create a 500-person conference, good luck. That is going to be very, very hard to pull together and to get those people. So it's far better to wait until you have a larger audience you're speaking to, because in a lot of ways it is a numbers game.
Well, though, I think I did love that in the book, I think you told the story that I think it was your first mastermind, but the first thing you did was you basically just sent out an email to your list and had, I think it was 10 people. What was it? Come to your apartment in New York for kind of a day-long event, and that was the first time that you actually monetized doing a meeting?
Yeah, that is correct. And the caveat there is that, again, to the point of going deep with people, the way that I even came up with the idea of doing this or thinking this was a good idea, it was not me saying, I want to have a live event. I wonder who I could get. It was me doing a pilot version of my Recognized Expert course. So I was engaging pretty intensively with about 50 people who were in this pilot. And they came to me and said, hey, we want to meet each other in person. What can we do that's an in-person event? And so I said, oh, you're interested in that? Well, that's cool. Let me see if I can pull something together. So we did a doodle poll about the dates, and I said who would be interested if we do this. This was a paid event. The first one was really run as a pilot, so I did it for $1,000 a head just to test it out. And within essentially 3 or 4 emails to folks, one a blast email and then a few to targeted people who had been in my orbit, I was able to fill it. So it was pretty low key. It was a very low key way of bringing people together, making 10 grand and creating a great experience for folks.
Yeah, so I think that's a good lesson for folks. And, if you get the book and pick it up, you'll read more about it. But you don't have to make these things overly complicated. You can just do it simple if you know what your tribe and your avatar actually wants and can deliver it in a good way, which I think that goes back to your point of laying the groundwork and going deep. But then I think the last section or the last part of the book is where you really get to what most entrepreneurs want to start with. And that's doing things like launching online courses and creating digital products. What's kind of the best advice you can give for people about thinking through how they develop their online strategy for those kind of scalable assets?
So for online courses, for instance, the methodology that I share in Entrepreneurial You, which is drawn heavily from my interviews with Danny Iny and Jason Van Orden, a couple of great online entrepreneurs, and these are methods that I used as well in launching my Recognized Expert course. It really starts with the importance of having a pilot first. It is very risky to spend all your time creating this amazing course and just kind of hoping and assuming that people will like it and want it. What is far better to do is to spend very little time creating an online course and instead write up a sales page. Just write a page describing, hey, I'm thinking of doing this thing. Would you be interested in this thing at this price point? And see what happens. Many people will say yes in theory. What you need to do with a pilot is make people pay you money. That is the real test. Will they open their wallet for something? Typically, the bargain with a pilot is that folks will get in on the initial iteration for less in exchange for, number one, being gentle because they know that it's a pilot and you're working it out. And number two, their willingness to give feedback about it. What do they like? What do they not like? What do they think is missing, etc. And if you have that, if you're able to get enough people who say, yeah, I'm interested. Yeah, I'll spend some money on this. That is really good validation of the premise. And then their feedback that they provide gives you the data that you need so that by the time you fine tune the offering for a broader release, you are in pretty good shape to know that it's good, that people are interested in this in general, and that your take on it is good because it has been crafted in response to the needs of your target audience.
Yeah, I think that's great advice, and I'm actually taking it this time around. I have this week, as we're recording this, earlier this week, I did the first of a series of 10 masterclass sessions I'm doing where I'm having entrepreneurs. I had them I used a pay what you want model rather than setting a price, but I'm having them answer a survey about the topic and tell me what they want to hear. And then I'm crafting the message based upon that. And so I can already see that it's going to lead to a much better result because I'm addressing the things that my potential customers actually want to hear and need to hear. And one thing you didn't mention, Dorie, is at the end of the day, hopefully you get a bunch of people who will give you raving testimonials for your course when you actually launch it at full.
Yes, exactly.
So another thing that I think people struggle with, or that I struggle with, is we often want to bite off more than we can chew or do a signature course, let's say a $2,000 course. And so we can have a tough time sometimes with doing the smaller digital products. Do you have advice for people in figuring out how to do that, how to kind of come up with a smaller piece, a smaller offering so that they have a way for people to kind of get in the door?
Well, one way to think about this, so Danny Iny, who I mentioned earlier, who I profiled in Entrepreneurial You, he had what I think is a very illustrative experience. His first experiment with online courses, and he's now become very knowledgeable and teaches people about online courses, but his first experiment years ago did not go well. He created an online course that basically no one bought, which was kind of sad, and so it became a learning experience for him. But that course, he called it Marketing That Works, and the goal was that it would be like everything that a human being would need to know about marketing. And of course, it's like so broad. People don't really want that. Nobody wants the teach me everything about everything. It wasn't differentiated enough, and so instead, what led to his breakthrough, Marketing That Works was intended to be this kind of big flagship sort of thing. But much as we've been talking about, you got to listen to your audience. And so what Danny did, essentially as a way of trying to market this failed course, was he started guest blogging like a maniac. And this is a few years back. He did 80 guest blogs for different publications over the course of a year. So he was just ubiquitous with this. And everybody noticed, and they're like, wow, how are you guest blogging this much? Like, what's up with this? And so he got enough requests asking about this, people being curious about it, that he said, maybe I could do like a little course about that, like literally just that slice. I mean, obviously, guest blogging would be a subset of marketing that works. But instead, he's like, no, I'll just do a little course about that. So how to do guest blogging effectively. And he put that out there for, I think the pilot was maybe $79 and ultimately it was 99 or, 100, 150 or something. It's a lower dollar price point. And he did that, and that really connected with people. And it's because it was specific enough that they thought, oh, I don't know how to do that. I need that. Whereas, hey, I'll teach you about marketing is just not a compelling enough value proposition.
Yeah, I think that's a really good piece of advice because, again, I think people need to understand the transformation that they're going to get at the end of a course. So, how about you talk about ebooks? Do people really make money with ebooks?
They can make money from ebooks. Generally not if they're an Amazon ebook because, meaning the kind of self-published, like, hey, it's $1.99 or, whatever. Amazon has its preferences. And so it essentially likes to cap the prices of ebooks so that they're, on average, maybe $10. They're pretty much no more than $15 because that's what they've decreed that an ebook should cost. If you do that, you can get a lot of exposure, certainly if you price it at the lower end, but it's hard to make a lot of money that way. I mean, of course, there's exceptions. There's a Hugh Howey of the world and everything, but it's tricky. However, if you do an ebook that is premium priced and you sell it on your own website, now, caveat here, that means you have to have your own traffic. But if you sell it on your own website, if it's premium pricing, let's say it's $30, let's say it's $100, which sometimes you can actually do if you create a little bit of a multimedia experience where it's not just a book, but maybe there's some complimentary videos or some other things like that. If you're able to do it that way, you can use a service like Gumroad or something like that to process the sales. You can actually do quite well. In fact, Pat Flynn, who's now a well-known podcaster, has a podcast called Smart Passive Income, got his start, and I profile him in Entrepreneurial You, by doing ebooks. And what he discovered, to his shock, he had started blogging because he was trying to pass. He worked in an architecture firm. He was trying to pass an environmental certification exam. And it was this tricky test. And he figured he could study better and learn more if he blogged about his experiences. So he put it all up. He passed the test. It was good. And it occurred to him at a certain point, people can get all this material for free, of course, but it's a little annoying to read, 100 blog posts. He thought maybe some percentage of the people would like to read it in ebook format. That just might be easier for them. And so he decided, kind of on a lark, to put it together as an ebook and just see how many people bought it. It turns out that the first month he put it up, now this is not necessarily typical, but he had been blogging for a while, so he'd built up very good SEO, very good search engine optimization. He sold $7,900 worth of ebooks that first month. And the timing was amazing because it turned out the following month he got laid off from his job at the architecture firm. It would have been really devastating for him if he did not have a side income. But because this was going so well, he decided, you know what, I might double down on this. Let's see where this can go. And now, 10 plus years later, he has created this very robust business empire for himself.
Wow, that is a great story. I love Pat's story. And if anybody needs inspiration, they should check it out. Now, Dorie, you've given some great advice, but I think I mentioned earlier, I'm on a quest to read 52 business books this year. So obviously the listeners should definitely pick up your books, including Entrepreneurial You and Reinventing You and Stand Out. But other than that, are there books that you would recommend to the listeners that could help them on their entrepreneurial journey?
Yeah, there's definitely some interesting ones. I would say some that stand out for me are, I read a really great book a few months back called Machine Platform Crowd by Andrew McAfee and Eric Brynjolfsson. It is a book that's kind of an overview of trends in technology, from AI to crowdfunding, and it's an interesting look at the future of business. I thought that was quite valuable. And in terms of kind of straight up business books, things that we can learn from, I recently read, on the recommendation of a friend, Shoe Dog by Phil Knight. It's about the history of Nike. I am not a big sneaker person or a big sports person for that matter. So I stayed away from it for a long time because I'm like, really, this is probably not going to be very interesting. But regardless of whether you like those things or not, it's a very interesting book of how he built his business and sort of the mechanics of it. So I thought that was pretty great. And then another one I'll give a shout out to. There's a book. I think it's just about to be released this month. I read an advanced copy, but it's called Nimble by Baba Prasad, and that was a very cool book about increasing your business's agility.
Yeah, that seems like a good thing that everybody needs to know these days.
Yeah, exactly.
Now, Dorie, I always like to ask my guests this one kind of question, and that's because I like to think in small steps and actionable steps. So, what is something that a listener could do, say, in either 5 minutes a day, or that they could get done by the end of this week, and I guess, the end of the week, to improve or really start to monetize their expertise? What is kind of that actionable nugget that you could give them?
Yeah, I would refer back to a great story that I was able to capture in Entrepreneurial You that I've found very inspiring in the time since I wrote it. It was told to me by a guy named Michael Parrish Dudell, who's a consultant here in New York. And I loved his story. He really wanted to be an entrepreneur, but and all the things that he could theoretically do as a consultant, he knew he could do. He knew he could advise people. He knew he could write. He knew he could help people. But the one thing that he had never done was he'd never sold anything. And he was a smart enough guy to realize, if I'm going to be an entrepreneur, you have to sell. You have to be good at that. I think a lot of people don't necessarily recognize that or embrace it, but Michael did. And he said, all right, I've got to test myself. There is only one way to find out. And so when he launched his business, he said, I'm giving myself 30 days. I'm giving myself 1 month. And if I cannot get one client in my first month, when I am giving it my all, if I'm going all in and I can't get one client, I'm just going to give up. I'm just going to go back and look for a day job and, say that was a nice dream, but it's not going to work out for me. And, he wanted it. So he really pushed himself, and he did the things that a lot of nascent entrepreneurs hesitate to do, which are the most important things, the riskiest things. He called everyone in his network. He reached out to them personally. It wasn't this like, oh, let's hide behind a blast email bullshit. He was calling people up and saying, here's what I can do. Here's the business that I'm launching. Do you need help? Do you know people who need help? He asked for referrals and contacts and connections. And within that first month that he launched, he was able to get not one, but 3 clients, which started off his business. And so he's never looked back. But I think that the key is really just getting started, and especially being willing to, I think sometimes new entrepreneurs think, oh, I'll just, get some clients from these like mythical strangers that are going to appear, when, the truth is, for the vast majority of people, your first clients are always going to be people that already know you. And that might feel psychologically risky, but those are the people that we have to go to. Those are the people that know us enough to give us a chance. And if we can do that, we can really drive our business forward.
I think that's great advice. I know in my case, it wasn't necessarily people I knew, but it was people I knew who introduced me to the person who needed my service. So I think that's
exactly.
Definitely, networking, as much as me as an introvert, I don't enjoy doing it. It is an important part of building a business. Dorie, I want to thank you for coming on and giving some really great advice. If listeners want to get in touch with you, other than going out and grabbing your books, how can they get in touch with you and get information about the services you provide?
Yeah, thank you so much, Bobby. One of the best ways to do it is I actually have a free resource specifically related to how to create multiple income streams in your business. It's the 88-question Entrepreneurial You self-assessment, which helps you walk through the process of how to think about creating more passive income and more income streams in your work. So if folks would like to get that for free, they can download it at DorieClark.com. It's DorieClark.com/entrepreneur.
Thanks for that. And we will obviously have a link in the show notes. So if you can't write it down, you'll get that. Dorie, thank you for being on the show. That is it for our interview, but listeners, stay tuned for the quick legal lesson after the break.
And now for today's legal lesson.
Yay! Hey, Dorie is a really great entrepreneur, and she had some really great advice. And I do highly recommend that anybody who's listening to this should go and pick up a copy of her book, Entrepreneurial You. It has some great guidance, some great stories, some great inspiration that'll get you going. Now, in today's legal lesson, I wanted to focus on a recurring theme I'm going to come up with, but it's a theme that really does apply to really every phase or every method of trying to monetize your genius or monetize your expertise that Dorie talked about. And that is, you need to have written agreements in place every time money changes hands. You should just adopt that rule. If money is going to change hands, there needs to be a written agreement. And in some cases, it can be, a formal written agreement where you actually are signing on paper, or in other cases, it could be something like you have a terms of use on your website and they have to click and agree. But the point is that you need to get a written agreement with everyone who is giving you money that sets out what are the terms of what you're agreeing to. In other words, it needs to say what you're going to provide, what they're going to get, what the terms are of their payment, what are they obligated to do, when do they have to pay, etc. But also, if you have a refund policy, what's the refund policy, and all of that. And you need to do that to make sure there's no dispute down the line. So let's kind of go through the different monetization methods that Dorie talked about, and we'll kind of talk about what you need there. So the first one she talks about, and she stresses, is coaching or consultant. That's the one-on-one work. And in that relationship, you need to have a client agreement. That client agreement should actually be a written agreement that sets out, all of those key things. What work are you going to perform? But also you might want to put in what you're not going to perform if there's something that could be some dispute. So you put that in, you put what it is that they're going to do. I mean, what are the payment terms? Is it a one-time payment, or are they paying on a monthly basis? Are they paying hourly, or is it a retainer? Whatever it is, you just need to set out what the agreement is. Then it'll have some other terms like, what happens if you have a disagreement? How do you resolve disputes? Things like that. And you'll want to have in there standard clauses that you want to have in all agreements, things that are called, for example, an entire agreement clause. This is a clause that says, hey, this written agreement is the entire agreement. Nothing else matters. If we want to change it, we're going to make changes in writing by a written amendment. So the point of that is so that if there's ever a dispute, you say, okay, well, let's go back and look at what we wrote down. So that's the key one. But then let's talk about some of these other ways. A podcast. Well, you need to have written agreements on podcasts. One thing, for example, anytime someone appears as a guest on my podcast, they have to check something. They have to check a little box when they make the reservation the appointment that says that they are agreeing to give me the right to use the interview. So that's an IP issue. I need to make sure that that's covered. But obviously, when I get to the point of monetizing and having advertisers, I'm going to have a written agreement with those advertisers about what the deal is, what are they getting, and in exchange, what are they going to pay me? The same thing if you're going to speak, you should have a speaker's agreement. And if you're speaking for free, maybe that's not a big deal, but if money's going to change hands, you need a written agreement. Your blog, again, if you have advertisers, you need a written agreement with advertisers. So you can just kind of start to see the themes that come up over and over again. Now, let's then talk about what happens once you really start to kind of scale, and that's in an online course or a digital product that you're selling, things like that. That's where you're going to use your terms of use or your terms of service. Now, some people might have a separate terms of use for each product. If you have a ton of products, maybe you need to do that, but you could also literally just put it into a single terms of use on your website. And then you are going to have a checkbox when they purchase, where they check to say that they are accepting your terms of use. There you go. You have a written agreement with them. They have agreed to it. There's no questions, so it's solved. In that written agreement, your terms, you're going to put what you're providing. You're going to put if there are limitations. So, for example, if someone is not allowed to take it because they are a competitor, for example, but you would put things also like if they get a document and they're only allowed to use that for one business, any kind of limitation like that, you'll put in. You'll also put in the terms of your refund policy. So if you have a 30-day money-back guarantee, you tell them that, but you also set out what the requirements are. If you want to put in any requirements about, for example, getting, showing the work or something like that, you put that into the agreement. I personally don't do that, but if you want to, you can. So those are the kinds of things you put into your terms of use so that you have a written agreement before money changes hands. So that's the theme, and that's what you need to think about. Anytime you're making money, you need to have an agreement. Now let's move to the last area. The last area is affiliates. If you are going to have affiliates, you should have a written agreement with them. If you are going to be an affiliate, you should have a written agreement. The reason why is that's going to set out the terms so there's no dispute later, so everyone knows what is the agreement, what do you get if you refer someone, what are your responsibilities, etc. So again, get it in writing and you'll be in good shape. So that's it for today's lesson. The point is, as you go and build these different monetization methods, make sure that you're documenting it, getting a written agreement each time before money changes hands. If you do that, that will help you to stay on safe ground legally and avoid disputes in the long run. That's it for today. I'm Bobby Klink signing off. Got some exciting episodes coming up, so I hope you'll stick around. Again, if you haven't given us a rating or review on iTunes, I'd appreciate it if you would, and subscribe to make sure you get all these episodes as they come out. Until next time, I'm Bobby Klink signing off.
Thanks for listening, and remember to visit mistakes.youronlinegenius.com to get your essential guide to the 4 legal mistakes that can doom your business and how to avoid them. Join us next week for another episode to expand your online genius and your success.